Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is Liam Martin. And Liam is the co-founder of Running Remote and Time Doctor. And he loves anything and everything connected to remote work. So today we're going to discuss leadership and communication in the context of where work is going, how to inspire your team in the virtual world and be more successful in this wild distributed future that we're moving into inextricably now. And I love Liam because he's passionate. I love him because he is well-spoken about his passions. And I think you're going to really enjoy what he has to say. Welcome to the show, Liam.
John, thank you for having me. I also love you as well. I don't know for what reasons yet, but hopefully we'll get into that throughout the podcast. I think that where we're at right now, you're right that it's a wild ride. The last 2.5 years have easily been the biggest transition in work since the Industrial Revolution. Just to kind of give everyone context, before we went in to COVID, February of 2020, 4% of the U.S. workforce was working remotely. And by March, 45% of the U.S. workforce was working remotely. It's the biggest transition in work.
Say that again?
4% of the U.S. workforce was working remotely in February of 2020. And by March, it was 45%.
Wow.
It was a 10x increase. And we're currently sitting at around 33% of the US workforce working remotely, with less than 10% of that workforce that works from home, working from home due to the pandemic. So we're at 90%, what I like to call premeditated remote work. So we've had a complete transition of our economy. Again, it's the biggest thing since the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took 80 years. We did that in March. So I don't think anyone kind of really recognizes the transition that's occurred and how this is going to impact real estate, how this is going to impact the way that businesses are built, how it's going to impact technology, but more specifically, as per this podcast, how it's going to affect leadership, how we're actually going to be able to lead our teams towards success. Because the reality is that you're going to have at least a third of your workforce, and probably all of your workforce very soon, remote. How do you actually lead effectively during that process is what I'm super interested in trying to figure out. Hopefully, actually, you can help me, John, because to be honest with you, we've done it a certain way for over a decade, and we may not actually be doing it the right way because all of this stuff was brand new before COVID. But it's a really, really interesting subject and something that I think that everyone should be spending, particularly if they're a leader, the vast majority of their time investing in.
Yeah. I think it is a huge transition, and I don't think that it's going away. And I think that there's variously excitement, indifference, and resistance to it. But I do think that this is the future. So before we jump into that, Liam, who is a leader that personally impacted you on your journey to where you are now? Cause you're all over the place. You've been on hundreds of podcasts. You've got a YouTube channel. You run events and stuff. One would look at you and say that you have achieved a certain level of success. I know it's not over yet, but so who's somebody that has contributed to you in terms of leadership and the success that you've attained so far?
Now, I have to ask you a qualifier question connected to that.
Okay.
Are they people that I have directly interacted with, or are they people that I've studied?
How about one of each?
Because those are two separate groups.
Yeah, one of each.
I would probably say for me, when I look at just someone who can give a speech and get people rallied up in a way that is both exciting but also calming at the same time, you can't do anything better than one of your old ex-presidents, Barack Obama. The tonality, the way that he communicates, the way that he uses diction to be able to effectively communicate excitement, and the way that he's addressing people, but also his ability to be able to keep everyone kind of I would almost say encapsulated inside of a box. Like no one ever screams with excitement when they listen to Barack Obama speak, but it is one of those things that he can rally large swaths of people. And I actually think that was probably the number one reason why he got elected to be the president of the United States. So that's one person that I definitely study a lot. And I've gone through quite a few of his speeches because there are so many available.
Yeah.
To really kind of get access to how he addresses people. And then I think the second person that I have dealt with personally is Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
And probably the best talk that you can Google is just type in Simon Sinek, Where is My Why? He gives a TED talk about that. And it's probably one of the best singular talks on trying to rally leaders inside of your own internal organization to be able to get them to step up to the plate and say, why are we building this business? Not just how are we building this business? So from a tactical perspective, Simon is absolutely, and also he's an amazing public speaker. The way that he can deliver that information, I mean, I would probably say in the business world, he's top 3 in my opinion.
Yeah. He's somebody that I've hung out with personally, Liam, at the TED conference. I got to talk to him for like 45 minutes, and then I've seen him a time or two since then, just bumping into him in the streets in New York. What a great guy. What a fabulous, that guy totally, utterly changed my life with this concept of starting with why. And now, just as a point of clarification, do you mean his talk that was originally a TEDx talk where he draws the circles on the
so that one is good. I mean, I think he has 3 or 4 versions of that that you can kind of. And what I would suggest that you do is if you're really trying to rally a business group, right? Yeah. So if you're the co-founder or executive of a company of over 100 people, particularly if you're going to address them remotely, I think probably step 1 would be go and listen to 5 or 6 hours of Simon's talks, which is probably, I mean, there's probably dozens of hours on YouTube that you can go and access to. And don't just listen, watch, because the way that he moves as well is a really important indicator of the way that he kind of communicates excitement, and then will pull that back from people. He'll speak very slowly for certain sections. And then when he wants to get everyone excited, he'll talk about very quickly about one particular thing. You know, it just kind of even using that diction is really important. And overlaying that, at least for me, what I did is I took that type of style and then I really made it my own. Yeah. So I would probably say I'm, who is that guy? It was a movie way back in the 90s. I am Simon Sinek meets Forrest Gump. So
there you go.
that's my style, right? Mm-hmm. So I've got the Simon Sinek intellectual side where people will say, oh, you know what? This guy knows what he's talking about. And I'm excited to be able to follow him. But then on the other side, I've got the Forrest Gump approachability component that I personally already do have when you speak to me in person. So I wanted to be able to merge those two. And I think it's really important for people to effectively discover their kind of speaker leadership avatar, particularly when addressing everyone inside of an organization, to identify, well, what do people want to actually come away with? What feelings do they want to come away with? Not just what information do I want to present to other people inside of the organization. So if you can identify the feeling, I would turn it into an avatar. I would say mine is, as I said, Simon Sinek meets Forrest Gump. You know, I'll, the very end of a talk, as an example of maybe like half an hour that I'll record, I'll just say, and guys, I got to go pee. Great talking to everybody. See you later. Right. That's something that Forrest Gump would say, but something that Simon Sinek wouldn't. And it's the truth. Right. Yeah. But then everyone kind of gets a laugh out of that. And again, I become a lot more approachable because they think, oh, well, Liam pees too, just like everybody else. I don't know what that kid's book, right? Everyone poops.
Yeah. It's a good book. Yeah.
Everyone does that. So you have to kind of do a bit of a hat nod to all of those people in your organization that might be a little bit intimidated by you. And I don't think, by the way, this is something, the intimidation component probably does work for a public talk, but I think you need approachability in an internal talk, because you want to be able to encourage your employees to be able to approach you and ask you questions. And if you seem like you're someone on an ivory tower somewhere, it's unfortunately not very useful for the approachability factor that I think is important.
Well, that's actually something, Liam, that public speakers, I've been coached, a lot in this, and I coach the people I coach in this. People are always looking for a way that they are different from you as the speaker, right? Oh, he's got something I don't have. She has something I don't have, right? Like they're, and it's unconscious, but people are always looking for how they're different, like what you as a speaker might have that they don't have. So I think that it is, if you want to really move people to action and you want to inspire people and you want to be influential, I think it's actually very important to get people to understand that you are like them and they are like you, and have that connection, because otherwise people just check out and they think, oh, Liam has something I don't have. Forget it. This doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree on that one. I think the approachability factor is so important to recognize that. And I can tell you, just in reflection of me and my co-founder, my co-founder is much more ivory tower-ish. And a lot of people will say that they're intimidated by Rob. If Rob's listening to this right now, I definitely get a lot of feedback from people saying they're intimidated, but they don't communicate that same level of intimidation towards me. And I think it is directly because I really try to make sure that I'm as approachable as humanly possible, which I do not communicate to public spheres. I do focus that much more. I kind of elevate my Forrest Gump internally as opposed to externally.
Right. Well, so, there's a lot in what you've already said. I want to go back and just pinpoint a few things. One is Barack Obama as a powerful communicator, his ability to communicate excitement but still be calm and seem, very on top of things, and yet also funny and excited. You said, and I agree, that his ability as a speaker was probably one of the most influential things in getting him elected, because it wasn't his vast years of deep experience or anything like that, right? And so whatever you might think of Barack Obama as a president, I think that it's almost unarguable that his ability with oratory helped tremendously in getting him elected. And that is something I think is just really important, because my focus, Liam, is to have people's ability to communicate about their ideas be as mighty as their ideas. And anybody who's not as good a communicator as Barack Obama, who thought they would have been a better president but was beaten because he was a better communicator, well, shame on them. Like, too bad. That's how life works, So I just think that's a really important thing to note, is just the dramatic impact on the world that his ability as a public speaker had, right?
Absolutely. I think that when you think about someone like Barack Obama, the first things that pop into my head are calm, cool, and collected. Yeah. You've never seen Barack Obama lose control. Whereas I think you've seen a lot of other presidents in the United States lose control. And you'll never see that from him, because that's just fundamentally not his brand. Yeah. And I think that when you think about someone who's presidential, you think about someone that doesn't lose their cool, right? That is, someone that basically is always calm, cool, and collected, someone that's always able to communicate effectively. And you want someone like that, who has the launch codes to be like that, even though he probably isn't like that in private spaces. I think he definitely communicates that on stage. And I mean, it's, to your point, getting better at communicating your ideas. Once you can get really, really good at communicating your ideas, your ideas, unfortunately, don't have to be as effective. It's effectively a cheat code for, bad ideas.
Well, and
at the end of the day. And we've seen that throughout history, by the way, as well, right? There's lots of people, particularly in the political sphere, that have presented horrible ideas to people, but because they were really good at communicating that information, they got what they wanted. They moved large swaths of people forward. And that's the power of authentic leadership and really communicating that messaging. I think there's probably no more powerful force, at least in the political sphere. And a lot of people inside of the business world, I think, miss that. And they don't spend as much time working on it as they should.
Well, and Liam, I do think I've part of the reason I've dedicated my life to this and to only working with people on the good side of the force is that I feel like the dark side already knows a lot of this stuff. The dark side is exceedingly good, and they don't have the constraint of needing to be authentic and have integrity and be truthful. Mm-hmm. They understand the dark arts of communication, and they don't have those constraints. The light side has those constraints, right? We need to be authentic. We need to have integrity, be truthful. And that just means we need to be able to communicate and understand how to communicate persuasively and effectively even more. It just makes it even more incumbent on us.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I think as you were saying that, it brought up thoughts in my own mind of when I deal with the press. And for professional journalists, New York Times, Economist, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Inc., I've been interviewed by them all. Mm-hmm. And it's like being in a long process of cross-examination. Yeah. There are a lot of things, by the way, that you can do to protect against that. You can always have your PR rep available. You record the call as well so that you make sure that you've got a version of the truth, and so do they. Right. But at the end of the day, effectively what those people are looking for is they're looking for 60 minutes of interviewing you and pulling out the 2 to 3 minutes that they see as the most click-worthy. And those are not necessarily the same 2 minutes that you would like presented to everyone else. So that's a different way of communicating that leadership component and persuasiveness. And a lot of the times what I try to do in those interactions is really try to get people, particularly in, the industry of journalism, on my side. And that's that's a completely separate podcast that probably we should deal with as well. But it's so important to be able to, that's a superpower. If you can sit down and persuade a journalist to effectively communicate what you want them to communicate, as opposed to what they think is going to be the most click-worthy, or at least convince them that what you are saying is the most click-worthy. Absolute superpower. And about 4 or 5 years ago, when I really started getting into this, I was always looking on, CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and these politicians that are always kind of sticking to their talking points. And I thought to myself, man, these one-dimensional people, like, this is incredibly boring. Why are they just, sticking to these talking points? And then I recognized that when you actually are confronted with the fifth estate, the journalistic industry, you have to stick to those talking points if you can't really persuade people in the way that at least I think I've done a better job doing than a lot of other people that just haven't recognized. You should never walk into one of those meetings without being properly trained. In my opinion, my PR people train me, very, very well on how to communicate that information effectively. And we would never have someone sit down with the New York Times unless they understood exactly what they were going to say, and then also recognize what they're going to possibly ask and how we can deflect against those questions.
Right. Well, right now in my Live Like a Leader course, I'm taking everyone through, starting in June, we're going to go through media training, because I think that what you just said is absolutely true, Liam. It is a superpower. It is super important. You've got to understand what's really happening when you're talking to the press, especially at that level. And everything that goes into being good at that is exceedingly important and useful as a leader of a company or an organization or a startup or a movement, you know, and to be able to have the discipline to think about stuff before you go into a meeting like that, and then stick with your talking points, and to have the discipline to have prepared for what questions may come up and really have thought about it and actually prepared your answers so that it's not the first time that you're thinking about it or blurting it out. All of that stuff just makes an amazing difference anywhere, anytime that you've got any kind of responsibility as a leader, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, that brings us to your specialty. Let's set the quick context for, working virtually. We could also call it working remote. We could call it distributed work. Those are all referring to the same thing. Set the context for this a little bit more. Remind us of this massive transition that we've just gone through, and tell us what you see in terms of the future of distributed work. And then let's talk about leadership and communication in that world, because I think that as we hear you set the context, we're going to realize that it's not like it's going away.
Right. Well, so first off, when we started running remote, which is the conference that we've been running for almost 6 years now, we were doing a remote work conference before remote work was really a thing. And in that big transition that we've seen over the last 2.5 years, there's been so many things that occurred that I could drone on for days, to be honest with you, about all the stuff that's happened. But just kind of focused on the leadership component, I think we're seeing a transition of what I like to call the introverted leader. So inside of remote first organizations, the biggest kind of operating system that remote companies run on is something called asynchronous management, which is the ability to be able to manage people without directly interacting with them face to face. So as much of that communication that I can communicate asynchronously, meaning I can communicate an email, I can make a video, I can send an instant message, and then that direct report, that employee, can consume that information when it's most opportunistic for them, where they're not actually losing focus in what my friend Cal Newport calls deep work. Basically, remote first organizations are just big, deep work machines at the end of the day, because they don't have to pay this cost of everyone coming to one single place every single day and saying, okay, now we're actually going to collaborate and we're going to communicate together. And I absolutely agree. Collaboration is very, very important. But remote first organizations have recognized that they can use an a la carte method for collaboration and in-person communication. So they can choose when they want to have that depth of communication, as opposed to on-premise in office organizations where they're confronted with that every day, and that creates a lot of distractions inside of the organization. So remote first organizations have this asynchronous management methodology, and inside of that, the advantage for people who are introverted is that they can now effectively be that inspiring leader that you probably wished you could have been, but you can't be, because inside of an office, as an example, you can't really communicate the way that extroverted, excitable, engaging individuals communicate every single day to become successful in the places that they're in. I'm a bit of a wallflower when it comes to communication, particularly inside of large groups of people. I like to kind of sit in the background. I like to have someone else do the vast majority of the talking. And I discovered that when we transition to a remote model and we communicate asynchronously, I, number one, can communicate through instant messaging, through email, through project management systems, and I can take my time to craft my message. So I can convince people more of my ideas. Effectively, the synchronous kind of forms of persuasion that are classically available inside of companies no longer apply as much as they do inside of asynchronous organizations. That's one big, huge factor that works into this. But then also, more importantly, if I want to be able to communicate a message to our organization, I rarely do it live. I usually do it through the format of video. So I'll shoot a video. I have a beautiful camera studio set up here in my office. I can sit down and I can write a script. I put it on my teleprompter. I think about what I'm going to say before I say it, and then I can communicate that message so much better when I've had the practice and forethought to communicate that message, as opposed to just something off the fly.
Right.
So that's the big difference. And that's where we're at right now, is I then take that message, communicate that to everyone inside of our organization. And the responses of pre and post are just like night and day.
Yeah.
People say, wow, you're so well spoken. This is fantastic. I'm excited about working inside of this company because I actually took the time to be able to think about it and communicate that message effectively, as opposed to if I was just in a boardroom, as an example, which I was in actually 3 days ago. We're doing our quarterly retreats. So we jump into boardrooms once a quarter. I'm usually pretty quiet. And when people do ask me to say something, I kind of stick it. I keep my speeches to under a minute, because otherwise I'll end up saying something really stupid.
Well, a side note, like, let's put a pin in where we are. I'm going to take a slight detour here for a second, because what you just said makes this asynchronous, in other words, not real time environment, much more advantageous for introverts. But here's a little secret that I just want everybody listening to know. That kind of thought and preparation is also what makes the extroverted, like really great speaking, well-spoken leaders. That kind of preparation is what makes them so good too. And anybody who's listening to this who thinks that that person they know who's such a well-spoken, good off the cuff, just always has such brilliant things to say, I want you to know, my experience would suggest that about 99% of those people prepare like freaking crazy so that they can seem so good at being off the cuff.
Yes.
Just a side note.
I do agree. They are really, really good. I can think about just the debate inside of, actually, generally, we can take this perspective. If you see someone in a boardroom, right, those big glass boxes, so there's someone that's looking from the outside. Let's say there's 8 people in that boardroom. Generally, without even listening to them, I'll be able to tell you whose ideas get adopted. It's just the guy that's the white, over 6 foot guy that's moving his hands and doing the majority of the talking, and sometimes kind of looks like Captain America. Right? Your stereotypical alpha male is usually the one who ends up having their ideas adopted the most. Why? Because throughout their entire lives, they've had that. There's a interesting factoid inside of Freakonomics, which is a great book that you should pull a ton of really interesting sociological information out of. And they identified that the males that were the tallest in the 6th grade ended up actually having the highest level of success long-term throughout their lives. So it's that kind of formative years where people look to you as the leader is a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of contexts. Yeah. So for the people that aren't, 6 foot, I'm 5'8", and I haven't had that type of, predestination effectively in terms of leadership. Yeah. I find for me, I can really reset myself, and I can, do my video 8 or 9 times. I can really get it to the point in which I think it's humming and it's just beautiful. And that's what I'm saying when I'm saying the people that maybe aren't necessarily born for this, I think with asynchronous management for the first time are actually able to truly be leaders and inspire their team members in the way that hopefully you've always kind of fantasized that you could be.
Yeah. I have no fundamental disagreement with that at all. I think that that's true. And I think that, it's an interesting note for the people who are introverts because it's an opportunity. I think it's also an interesting note for the people that are maybe less introverted, who are already leaders, who kind of got there through, partially at least got there through their ability with public speaking, and maybe they are tall and look like Captain America, because a lot of things change, right? And what used to, what got you here may not get you there. So I like to talk about the fact that your leadership presence is now largely about your virtual presence, right? How you show up on video, how you show up in Zoom, how you show up in whatever conferencing software you're using, and is different. There's some different things to think about there. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. So I've got a great YouTube video on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/runningremote, and it's about my video setup. So I'm looking right now at an A6500 with a 50 millimeter lens behind a teleprompter and a light ring. And then I have two other light sources. And the magic is the 50 millimeter lens. So I have this, it's a DSLR, so it's connected directly inside of my computer. So just with one switch, I can just switch to this view whenever I want. I also have a battery stud that basically is connected to a wall outlet. So the camera will run indefinitely. I don't have to need to change out any batteries.
Yeah.
And what this effectively gives me is a video view that is heads and tails above 99% of people that I meet on video. And it looks very cinematic. We actually run it at 24 frames per second so that it looks kind of quite epic. The way that people will literally say, wow, you look like you're, on a movie set somewhere. Well, it's just actually the way that you're presenting yourself. And a lot of people in offices, they dress for the job that they want. Well, I have a camera for the job that I want, which is I want to be able to communicate, hey, I look fantastic here. Even if I'm picking my nose, it'll be the most epic pic that you've ever seen in your entire life. And that communicates that perception of leadership, that perception of actually Liam does know what the heck he's talking about. Just look at the way that he's presenting himself in the new virtual boardroom, which is effectively Zoom.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, Liam, let me ask you, because from my research, there's something that I've found. Now look, I know that how you look, and that look is absolutely standout, and there's no question that it's arresting. And if you dress the part, right? This is the equivalent of dress the part. My research suggested there's something that's even more important than the video. Have you bumped into that yet, or shall I keep going?
You should keep going. I've done a lot of podcasts in the last week, so you'll have to keep going for me. Okay,
so here we go. I read a study where they took people and they put them into a movie theater, and they degraded the visual part of the movie, right? The visual part. People didn't notice that for quite a while. And once they noticed it, they thought the sound had gone bad. Then they put people in and they started to degrade the sound instead versus the video. And people noticed that almost immediately, and they hated it. And it turns out this is why movie theaters spent so much money putting in Dolby and THX and, all that, because, the audience is listening, right? So what this research suggested to me is that what's even more important, like, yes, get one of those cameras, get that 24 frames per second. That will make a huge difference. And the thing to do right before that is get an absolutely bumping microphone.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, a lot of people kind of don't necessarily like the Blue Yeti. But
I love that. Yeah, that's a
fantastic microphone. You can get them for about $50. They connect up to your setup. That's what I'm currently, you're listening to me on right now. It has a gain controller, so I can get very, very close to it. And that audio, because it's processed in part in the microphone, as opposed to just being processed by the software inside of your computer, it gives you that smoky way of communicating, that richness. Yeah. And I completely agree with you. Really important towards that overall look or I guess in this case, that overall sound that you want to be able to communicate to other people. So as much as you can do on your setup, I mean, to me, that entire setup, the light ring, the teleprompter, the DSLR, the connectors, even the Blue Yeti costs me about $1,000. Now, I know that sounds pretty pricey for people, but you could probably get that down to about $500 if you ended up downgrading your DSLR. Like, you don't need a 4K DSLR because the vast majority of Zooms are in 1080. So if you have all of that information together, you can probably get something set up for about $500. And the beauty of that too is that's the way that I do all of the YouTube videos that I have. Yeah. So with one little flip of a switch, Bingo. I'm up and running, and I'm running, all my videos. I'll have someone that sends me scripts. They're loaded into my iPad that goes into the teleprompter. And every last Friday of the month, I'll do about 6 videos that will just get loaded up, and then it goes off to the video editor. But the beauty of it is that setup is just a one-click on and off, and super important to have that entire look, because it really does communicate, hey, you know what? This person is in charge. They know what they're talking about.
Well, and back in the day, like $1,000, $500, that's not that much to spend for an outfit to go to work, right? And,
absolutely.
Now that we're all wearing nice shirts and then our pajama bottoms, you could take that money and put that into a nice video/audio setup for your Zoom meetings, and it just very quickly elevates you. And it's not always conscious for people, but I think people will start to take you more seriously when you do that. Now, I noticed that we're coming up against our time, Liam. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you another question. What do you think? Do you have any overlays or thoughts about how people can lead more effectively in a distributed environment? Like, what are some of the things that come up for you besides, making sure that you look good in video, making sure your audio is great? Like, that stuff, definitely agree, taken. How about a little bit more in terms of just leadership approach and style, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, the video and audio is actually the easy part in comparison to the more important part, which is actually inspiring people. And one of the biggest insights that I got in researching the book that I've been putting together over the last year and a half, which is about, in part, remote leadership, how to build effective remote organizations. It's not about whether you use Slack or Microsoft Teams. It's about how you actually manage people. And a major part of that is obviously leadership. I do talk a lot about how I don't think there are any managers inside of remote first organizations that are asynchronous. There are only leaders, because inside of asynchronous organizations, the vast majority of what a manager does in an office is redundant inside of asynchronous organizations. Communicating information is effectively done automatically. It's done by the platform. So the Slack tool, the Slack channel you have, the project management system that you use, the emails that you're communicating, all that information is communicated to your boss or your upper managers. So what I suggest that people do is focus on the EQ side of it. And there's a fantastic quote by my friend Chase, who is the head of remote at a company called Doist, which has in their product offering an app called Todoist, which is one of the largest task management apps on the planet. And he said, work at Todoist is not about the people, it's about the work that we're doing inside of asynchronous teams. So it's a really important point to be able to reinforce, because that's not what you see inside of in-office environments. The vast majority of in-office environments, they talk about their culture as, oh, well, we have pizza Thursdays and you get a cake on your birthday. No one cares about that. That's not what actually gets people excited about working inside of your company. What really gets people excited about working inside of your company is what you're doing. So how are you putting a dent in the universe? How are you changing the world in hopefully a positive way? But just fundamentally, how are you changing the world? And how can you get people excited to see that vision of where you're going as an organization? If people get really excited about it, then they have no problem working at 2 o'clock in the morning if they're really passionate about something. I think that when you can not necessarily decide between am I working right now or am I playing, that's the honey spot. That's the perfect time. That's the place where everyone is their most engaged, their most productive, their most happy. And so when you think about it, you have to actually completely change your contexts as it applies to remote work culture and focus everything on the vision of the company, how you're going to change the world, and getting people excited about that vision. And if you can't get people excited about that vision, first off, you should go and talk to John about hopefully getting you better at actually achieving that goal. But if you've gone through John's courses and training and coaching and you're still not there yet for a certain component of your organization, then that's when I think you actually need to reorganize your organization. You need to be able to get people on and off the bus as quickly as humanly possible, entirely focused on their excitement connected to the vision of the business and where you plan on going, not necessarily whether you get pizza on Thursdays or a cake on your birthday.
I think that's well said. And Liam, I think that what you're touching on is something that's always been important, and it has only become vastly more important in the world of remote work, which is that I think as a leader, your number one job is to constantly, in different ways and from different angles, be reminding people of the empowering context for everything you're doing, right? Because it's easy for people to get heads down in the paperwork, be shuffling things around, and forget the difference that it's actually making for people out there in the bigger world, right? Mm-hmm. And as a leader, if you can keep people in touch with that, the difference that they're making out there in the bigger world, the empowering context for all those late nights and all that hard work, boy, that'll keep us going forever,
Absolutely. So we do a lot of kind of very tactical things to be able to reinforce that. So everyone inside of the organization, you need to be able to know our passion, focus, belief, and core values. And we will randomly quiz you at any point. So our passion is we're accelerating the world's transition towards remote work. Our focus is that we're a work insights company, and our core values are that we are remote work advocates. We're passionate about what we do. We're determined and adaptable and generous. And I can explain that to you in a multi-paragraph version as well. And everyone inside of the organization within the first 3 months needs to be able to call that up at any point. And if they can't, that's a big problem. And you need to be able to actually go back to them and go into your own organization. If you're listening to this podcast right now and you don't even know, what the mission of your company is, that's a big red flag. But more importantly, if your employees don't know what the mission of your company is, that's an even bigger red flag. And you need to be able to reinforce that inside of the organization. And the way that we do it is we usually do it through shorts. So every single month, we will put out a short. And what I mean by that is we hire a cinematographer. And again, you don't have to go this crazy, but we hire a cinematographer and we pull out examples of people that are really encapsulating the world's transition towards remote work and bringing humanity to that target. So I just had someone that ended up speaking to me about 4 or 5 days ago when we were doing one of our conferences that we do every single year. And this man came up to me and he said, "You don't even know me, but I started looking at all your content about 6 months ago. And I just wanted to let you know, I've already made $1 million and you've completely changed my life."
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
He came over to me afterwards, tears, coming down, and just said, I was a boat captain before I ended up running a remote work agency. So this man essentially has an agency of remote workers, and he does graphics design work and website design work and all that kind of stuff. And he just said, you completely changed my life. You don't even know me. And, my life has completely changed due to you. So he's the next person on the docket, as an example, for our short. So we have basically a local cinematographer. We sit him down. We ask him a bunch of questions. What was your life like before remote work? What actually ended up creating that transition? What happened afterwards? And we put that into 4 to 5 minute, mini documentaries. Uh-huh. And if at least 10% of the team is not shedding a tear, then we haven't done our job correctly. Yeah, right. And so communicating that every single month back to people, again, reinforces that EQ side of it. Why are we doing something? Not what are we selling? That's the 17th most important thing inside of our organization. Why are we doing things? It's because we want to accelerate the world's transition towards remote work, because we know that that's the single most important thing to be able to make not only ourselves, but all of the employees inside of organizations as happy as humanly possible. And we know if we can move that 1%, we'll do more things for the world than anything else that we could possibly do. And so that's what you need to be able to communicate. That's, to me, real remote leadership. Not necessarily, whether or not people have their metrics and they're hitting their targets on time. That's all kind of due to the why, going back to Simon Sinek. Yes. That I highly suggest you go check it out, because that's really a fantastic baseline to be able to see all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of this podcast. Getting people excited about their work is the most important thing that anyone can do to become successful.
Well, I think that's fantastic, Liam. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about all this. I feel like we covered so many things that we probably need to get together again sometime and, go into some of these a little further. But I think it was a really great overview. I think it's a really great wake up call, maybe in some ways, just to reinforce that things have changed and they're probably going to stay changed in the world of work for the foreseeable future. And being better as a remote leader and as remote companies is just going to be an increasing advantage as we go forward, I think.
Absolutely. I believe that it is no longer a want, it is a need. You're going to need to learn how to do this. At least, as I said before, a third of your organization is going to be remote if you're the average, but you're probably going to be more than that. And if you think that this is going away, you've unfortunately got your head in the sand. You need to be able to adapt to this new reality.
Yeah. So I'll put this stuff in the show notes, Liam, and I maybe should have asked earlier, but where's the best place for people to find you? Where would you like to send people?
Sure. So timedoctor.com, that's our SaaS product, time tracking tools for remote workers. You can check that out. Runningremote.com is our conference that we run every year. And also our book is there as well. So runningremote.com/book, where I actually have a whole bunch of processes and documents on how to do remote work leadership, which are all available there. And then if you can't afford the book or a ticket to the conference, go to youtube.com/runningremote. All of our talks are up there for free, and it really is a masterclass on everything and anything connected to remote work. So I would check that out.
Well, and it's made at least one millionaire that we know of.
Absolutely.
So it's
always pretty uncomfortable to meet people like that, but it was incredibly humbling to be able to see that someone was able to take what we were teaching and completely change their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fabulous. Well, Liam, I'm going to send you an email with a link to my TED speech at TEDx Vilnius called How to Accept a Compliment, and it might make it less uncomfortable for you.
That would be great.
And, thank you very much. It's been a real blast talking to you. I think that this is the future, and thanks for helping us peer into it with a little more clarity.
Thanks for having me.
And to you listening, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found this conversation valuable. Would love it if you would take the time to give me a 5-star rating for speaklikealeader.show. That certainly would help more people find us. And if you have any questions, if you have suggestions, if there's anything you'd like me to cover, you know how to reach me. Just let me know. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.